Hello, bosses, and welcome to today's Fierce Fall webinar series. Today, we have the great pleasure of sitting down with Neera Tanden for a Power Lunch webinar. Now, our Power Lunch series is all about talking candidly with women who've crafted careers with passion and purpose. I'm Emilie Aries, the founder and CEO of Bossed Up. It's my pleasure to welcome you here. We've got women tuning in from across the country and beyond, many of whom are taking part in our Fierce Fall Challenge, our annual 10-week challenge to help you achieve that biggest, baddest goal that you have between now and Thanksgiving. So before we get started, I want to encourage you to use this chat bar that we have here. This is a place where you can chime in, share your Fierce Fall goal first and foremost. What is it that you're striving towards this season? Whether it's getting a new job, getting a promotion, or a personal goal, share away. This is a place where we can help you craft that happy, healthy, and sustainable career path. It's also a place where you can ask away, ask questions of Neera, and we'll make sure to save them for the latter part of this dialogue when I'll make sure that your questions get answered. Now, Neera and I are going to have a casual conversation just like a power lunch should be, and I am so excited to introduce her right now. Neera Tanden is the president of the Center for American Progress. She has served as an advisor to both the Clinton and Obama administrations and has a long record as a public servant and advocate for working people. Neera got her start at UCLA, got her law degree at Yale University, and it's my pleasure to introduce her to you today. So Neera, if you want to hit that cam button, you will bring yourself up here. Thank you so much for taking time.
It's great to be with you, and I'm excited to answer any questions and really talk about all the issues that are on people's minds.
Awesome. So here at Bossed Up, we cater to women who are navigating that sort of murky middle of career transition, where we know we're ambitious, but we also want to have a life, right? We want to have happy, healthy, and sustainable career paths. And that's why I'm so excited to talk to you today, because you are someone who's been on the rise, who's achieved so much. And we are just so happy to have you here to sort of share some of your secrets behind that process.
Lack of sleep. That's a big one.
I hear you. I hear you. As someone who's here post red eye, I certainly appreciate that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to start by just saying that your career has clearly had a purpose to it, right? Mm-hmm. Throughout every job you've taken, it seems very clear to me you have a track record of working on behalf of working people, really fighting for and advocating on behalf of all of us who are just trying to make it work and who are busting our butts, to make ends meet. Can you tell me how you got clear on that purpose of yours and how that sort of mission in your life has informed your career path?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to have had this kind of experience where I've worked in a variety of different areas, but I like to think that it's all really about public service. So I've worked in the private sector at, the Center for American Progress now. I've worked for politicians. I've worked in campaigns, in the White House and various agencies. But, and it hasn't been hyper planned. It's
right.
Definitely not like I was like, one day I will be president of a think tank.
Right.
When I'm in my 40s. But,
right.
But I have felt, I have to say, even when I was even when I was really younger in college, I always wanted to do something that would make me very excited. And for that for me has been working on issues that really are about expanding opportunity and making sure everyone can, I know it sounds really hokey, but everyone can, every single person can kind of have the opportunities I did. I mean, I have a kind of non-traditional path. My parents got divorced when I was really young. They got divorced when I was 5, and my father left. And, my mother was an Indian immigrant in the United States. Like she didn't know that many people. And she really faced a stark choice to go on welfare or actually go back to India. And I say this whole long story because we went on welfare. My mother was really determined. After a couple of years, she got a job as a travel agent, and then she worked her way up to actually get a job, working at Raytheon in her hometown. And I was able to, we lived in subsidized housing, and eventually she was able to buy her own house. But I really took from that experience. And I went to really good public schools and made it to UCLA. But I really took from that experience that, a lot of people made decisions, sort of public policy decisions that ended up really benefiting me. And at the end of the day, I got really motivated to try to do that for other people.
Right.
Whether it's in public policy or from an advocacy position where you're really trying to make change. And so I feel, so I really was excited to do that. I started in college, I started on campaigns, and I ended up getting a job in the government and then going in and out of these different cycles. But truthfully, the thing I would say is, the thing I would say is, oops, I kind of lost for one second.
That's okay. We can still hear you.
Okay, great. The thing I would say is, I have been able to, I've worked a lot of long hours at various different jobs. I definitely pulled all-nighters, et cetera, in campaigns.
Right.
But I found it so much easier to do that when you're excited about what you're doing, whatever it is. But if you feel like you're part of a mission to make change or to do, to serve the interests of your company or whatever it is, I think it's much easier to kind of put in those long hours and make this, sometimes what feels like a fair amount of sacrifice to kind of move up. So that's kind of been my, I don't have a secret or anything, but my motivation has been like, it's easier when you feel like you're doing something that's, something bigger than yourself. It's then it seems it's always been easier for me to kind of grind at it.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because the millennial generation gets talked a lot about, but I think one thing that is glaringly obvious to me and my peers and a lot of women in the Bossed Up community is that we want to craft careers that are purpose driven and impact oriented. And it's interesting to sort of get to know your own story and your own history as such an important part in helping, refine down all those options to really focus on what kind of change you want to see in this world.
Right. No, what I'm super excited about, truthfully, is the things that give me kind of the most hope in a time where it's like a lot of politics, it's kind of depressing, is that, millennials, this generation of women and men are, so mission oriented and so interested in making change and doing exactly what you said, having purpose in what they do, both inside the workforce and outside. And actually, they're driving a lot of change. People are driving a lot of change inside companies who are being forced to, give back more than they otherwise would, et cetera. So again, it's, I think that we can, there's opportunities to make change in sort of wherever you are. I work in the political process, and policy process, but there's obviously ways to make change everywhere.
Right. I want to sort of jump off of one thing you said early on in your answer about how you didn't plan out your whole career, because who does or who can?
Right.
And sometimes it can feel, especially with the women I work with, like, okay, what is the right sort of mix of planning and mindful decision making versus action, doing, showing up, being there, working hard? And so I just wondered, like, have you ever felt like you've gone off course or that you had to get back? And how did you navigate a time like that?
Oh, I've definitely in this career trajectory, and I think this is a really important thing. There were definitely jobs I've taken where I was like, this was a mistake. It wasn't, they weren't interesting to me, and they didn't use my skill set, etc. And I have to say, like, the one thing in both, I look back at it now, and I look back and the way I thought about that this was like such a terrible, terrible thing. And, what have I done to my career? And like, have I reached some dead end, et cetera? And I would say, one of the most important messages I'd have is, I've definitely had jobs like that where, it wasn't the right fit for me. It didn't make sense. I thought it was going to be one thing. It turned out to be something else.
Right.
And, the lesson from that is, like, don't do that forever. I think sometimes we get cautious about what people will think about leaving a job too early, or what does it say about me, or is it my fault? Sometimes things just don't work out. And the kind of career advice I give to people is there's been a couple of jobs like that in my career.
Yeah.
And, I've done them for a period and then, moved out and did something that I was much more excited about. And sometimes you have to go back a little to move forward. I haven't, I don't think it helps. I think the most important thing is to be excited in the job you're doing. And there are people I know in Washington, I'll just be honest, there are people I know in Washington who are like, I am looking for that job and I'm going to do everything I can to get that job. And they end up in some job that they're really not excited about. And it's hard to do a job you're not excited about.
Right.
Just my own experience is people just perform better when they're doing what they like. It's just hard it's hard to do a great job when you're not excited about it. So I would say from my own experience, like if you're in a job you don't like and it's not feeling right to you and you're worried about how people think about it, think hard about moving on, and you will recover. It's not like people, no one has ever bounced back from that or gone on to something else.
And it's a weird mix of like patience and fortitude to find.
Yeah, no. And it's like, everybody feels out these things as they go. But I remember I took a job where it was totally promised to me it was one thing. And it totally became something else. And it was really not like this. It was like, I could have done the job like 7 years earlier in my career. Wow. And I was like irritated and, and I was totally worried, like, if I leave this too early, what will people think? And then I look at it now and it was like, I wasted so many, who cares now, but like I wasted months when I should have just moved, not the next week, but I should have moved sooner.
That's interesting. So I want to ask you about that on that same sort of note. I think the vast majority of people who do leave their job leave because of a bad boss, right?
Yeah.
That's something that a lot of us struggle with. And
are there bad bosses? I had no idea.
I know, right? I actually heard you speak at the WIN Awards years ago. And I loved hearing you say that when you worked under Hillary Clinton, you hit the boss lottery. And I want you to tell me what that means and sort of what that says about the rest of us and sort of what component of luck there is and why that might not be such a hot thing.
Yeah. So, actually when I took this job, so I'm the president of a think tank, which Center for American Progress. And, I'm so proud of the institution. It's a great place where fantastic people work and we all get to work on trying to make policy change every day. And so I felt really, I feel kind of privileged to work here. And when I, keep doing that. When I started this job, I'm now, in my mid-40s, my son is 10 and my daughter's 13. And I kind of look around at other institutions and often it's, they're still mostly run by men.
Right.
But there's still, it's like in many places in Washington, it's still hard to find women who've climbed up the ladder who have a family. My husband works, I work, I have kids. And I realized that one of the reasons why I was able to move up the career trajectory that I have is because when my kids were young, I was able to continue to take more and more responsibility. So I'll just tell a story. Sure. I'll take a minute. But, when I worked for Hillary for a really long time. I'd worked for her starting in like the late 90s, off and on until her presidential campaign. And when she was running, when she's deciding whether to run in the very early stages, she asked me to be her policy director on her campaign. And the reality of a presidential campaign is it feels kind of like a 24/7 thing because it is kind of a 24/7 thing. Yeah. But at the time when that campaign started, my son was a year and a half and my daughter was 4.5. And so, I was really anxious. I ached over the decision. I'm lucky in another way, which is that my husband and I have always been co-parents, but it was definitely like things were going to move much more to him.
Right.
So one of our kids gets sick, like he's going to be the first person to call I'm not going to be the first person to call kind of thing because I may be on the road, etc. So I was like
Right.
really aching over it.
Hmm.
And I'd worked for Hillary for a long time, so she knew that I had kids, and she was very aware. And so we kind of struck up a deal, which is, I would work really intensely, but I would try to get home for dinner every night, unless I was traveling for a debate. But most nights I got home for dinner, I tucked my kids into into school, and then into bed. God, what is that? Very Freudian. And then worked really late in the night. So I worked really hard, and in that year and a half, I was able to, I didn't sleep as much as I'd liked, but I kind of fell off with friends. But I was there for my kids most of the time. I made parent-teacher conferences and things like that.
Yeah.
But I was able to do that. There were times where, I remember my daughter's pre-K graduation was on like the same day I was supposed to run Hillary's debate prep. And I was like, what am I going to do? Because I missed the pre-K graduation. I'm going to be a terrible mother. And my kid, when she's 16, is going to still be yelling at me about missing her pre-K graduation. So I went to Hillary and said, I'm going to have to put my deputy in charge. And she was great. She moved her whole schedule around so that I could do both. Right. So, so I was lucky to have a boss who was giving me the flexibility to do both things, to be a parent, be a mother with young children, and still have a job where I had incredible responsibility. I was one of the leaders of that campaign. And, I had a lot of responsibilities there. And the thing for me was, we didn't win. It was heartbreaking in that way, but I grew so much in that job. And my next job was, I worked for Senator Obama, and then I worked on healthcare. So when my kids were young, I didn't. Okay, somehow I just screwed everything up again.
That's okay. You're good.
Me and technology, not good. The whole thing about that experience for me, which I felt really grateful for, and I actually told Hillary this later, was, I was able to move up because I had a boss who really understood and didn't just talk the talk, but walk the walk, and like made changes. It was like in a presidential campaign to rearrange your schedule.
Right.
So one of your staffers can see her kids. There was one time, I was talking to Hillary and she looked at me and was like, what's wrong? And I said, I haven't been home. My daughter was kind of missing me and I hadn't been home, and we're doing all these debate preps at night. And she moved her debate prep to go after my kids went to bed so that I could go home and like put her to bed. And, I was really lucky because I'd worked for her for a long time. She was invested in me.
Right.
But so that's why one of the things so important is that the problem we have here in this country is that, a lot of people don't have sick days or paid leave. They have to rely. We don't have a system in place where everybody gets these kinds of flexibilities that, we don't have a system in which, it's sort of your right to take paid leave or your right to have flexibility. So it's really dependent on having someone be just an awesome boss. And I was really lucky. A lot of people don't have that.
Right.
But it also motivates us to in the work we do to think through, there's so many people who haven't worked for someone for 15 years and have young kids. And instead of feeling like they can go to their boss and say, I really need this day off, have to say, okay, I'm just not going to be there for my kid when they need me because I don't want to risk getting a promotion. And that's the kind of, we have to change the culture, but we also have to change the rules. So everybody, not just like the lucky few, but everybody can kind of move up in their career alongside their male compatriots. And it's not just a harsh choice for women who are facing these decisions. So that's a really long story.
No,
Sorry
it's great.
I
loved it. Not to worry. I think it's important to acknowledge that, like, the luck of the boss, the luck of the draw with regards to boss is not ideal. But it also,
So the one thing I would say too is, that's why it's so critical though for women to advance. At CAP, we've changed our policies after I became president.
Right.
We're pretty good. We weren't terrible, but we've made it easier for people to take time off. We have a culture too here, which is not that, if you have FaceTime in front of your boss, lots of people have kids here. We know that they have really important responsibilities, but
Right.
that they can do it really on their own time. And
Yeah.
so, for me, it's really important that I do that. And as more and more women advance, I think
Right.
and more women who have families advance will, I'm hoping we'll see real cultural change in the workplace too, which
Yeah.
is really critical.
It is that balance.
Even if it's tough, it's important to keep going.
Right. The micro change in your own office and the policy change on the macro level. I actually recently heard, I want to actually pause here and just say, I want to hear from the bosses who are here with us today. So chime in on the chat bar here with your experience on this. Is this something you are concerned with? Is this something you're worried about? Is this something you're dealing with? Or is it not even on your radar? I'd love to hear where you ladies are coming from. I recently was at an event with the editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan, Joanna Coles, and she made a great point. She said, kind of what you're saying, Neera, that it's important for women to hear when they're on that road to leadership that it actually can get easier instead of harder. Like the more responsibilities you take on, yes, your work can be intense, but the more power you have, the more power over your schedule, the more power over, policies like that. And so that's such an important message to hear. Like everyone who's part of the Bossed Up community is here because we're super ambitious and we're trying to make it all work. But it's just a reminder that like, if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling in a job that's not going to make it possible, like to keep working at it or keep surrounding yourself with better and better people. So that we can.
Yeah, no. And I would say one thing I would say too is like, truthfully now I do control my own schedules.
Right.
It's actually easier for me. I mean, I have a lot of responsibilities, so I still face those conflicts, but
right.
On the day-to-day for most of the time, like I can still be at my, I'm in the home in the morning to get my kids ready to school, and it's now more and more on me to do that.
Right.
And so I definitely agree that the path does get easier, and it's not always like it's a harsh slog.
And what I've heard,
people get it.
Yeah, and what I've heard from your story about your time on the campaign with Hillary is also that the more invaluable you become, the more negotiable all of that is. And so we're hearing from Elizabeth in Syracuse, New York, saying, yes, I'm concerned, about to negotiate for a new job and wondering how to include this concept without jeopardizing my candidacy. And Greta from Seattle says, super encouraging, would love that flexibility in the future. And Elizabeth, we could talk all day, and we are going to do something soon on negotiation. So keep posted on that front. Because there's a ton of data around, like, don't mention your parental status until you've got the job. And then once you're negotiating, it can be really tricky. But let's talk more about that, Elizabeth. Tweet at me and we'll continue the conversation that way, or find us on Facebook. We can dive in there too. But it is like the ultimate conundrum. For women
there's this whole, there's all these conversations now, which is great. There's all these conversations now about like women leaning in and like pushing, etc. And the thing that I've worked in places where it's really rewarded to be honest about being a parent, and people respond well. But I've also worked in places where there is a mindset, particularly in Washington, like you have to work 24/7, and if you're a person, I have workplaces where I fully understand why women feel anxious about expressing these things, because there is a kind of, there is a penalty.
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
I don't want to be Pollyannish. Like I had a path. It's like very easy. I mean, the truth is I'd worked, one of the reasons why was where I was. And to just go to your point, I'd worked for Hillary for 11 years. I knew every one of her positions. In some ways it was like, it wasn't very easy to replace me. I mean, she really likes me too, but
but you're invaluable at that point.
To your point, when someone has invested a lot of, when you have a lot of human capital to bring to something, you have a lot more negotiating power. But on the other point you're making, or that Elizabeth is making, or this issue about negotiation, it's like something you definitely have to feel out with people, because there are work settings where it's we do live in a world today where the truth is, when you look at the hard numbers, it's still the case that employers tend to pay men more when they become parents. And because there's just an assumption of the world that a man is like taking on more responsibilities, and if he needs to feed a family. But when a woman, becomes a parent, there are some, sticks to that. So women don't get more money when they become a parent. The assumption is that
she's a liability. She's a flight risk.
She's not going to be focused on her job anymore. That I don't want people to, I don't want to give false advice, but it's one of the reasons why it's really important that we kind of shift the way people think. I mean, we never, I try to go the other way in the way we promote here, et cetera. So I try to be very neutral towards everyone, but I certainly don't think that, I make more money than my husband, and I don't make any assumptions about mothers being just like the secondary bread owner. So, but these are all great issues to tackle.
And it's funny because the way that I love being a catalyst on this issue is by helping women navigate career transition when you need to. Because smart companies right now, more than ever before, are acknowledging that happier, healthier people are harder working and are higher performing. And so it's about finding the right company that's the right fit for you, and like owning your power and knowing your worth. But again, that's a whole other conversation. We could totally talk more about that. But Elizabeth, come to Bossed Up Boot Camp, but we could talk all about it. So I have one more question for you, Neera, and then we're going to open it up to our bosses here on the line. So feel free to start chiming in with your questions for Neera. So you have risen so quickly in a relatively...
It doesn't really go that quickly.
I bet it doesn't. And maybe I'm exaggerating a tad here. But, the Forbes list just puts you on the most powerful women in Washington. Elle magazine calls you one of the most, on the Washington power list of women. And how did you make that jump, knowing that you can't plan something like that? How did you find yourself as the president of the Center for American Progress? And what do you think have been some of the most important tools or tactics or strategies to getting you to where you are today?
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm really, I'm going to say things that are kind of cliche, but really true. Like, the reality of my advance has been that there are people on my career path who became super invested in me. And, one of the things about Washington, which is a good thing, really, is that, you, in government jobs or other jobs, really good people want to have good people around them because they do better. So like if you're in an agency or you're a senator or something, you want to actually have great staff because that staff is working for you. And, I like to think I did a pretty good job for Hillary, and I started here and worked for John Podesta for a long time. And, one's a man, one's a woman, both got really invested in my success. And so it wasn't that I was like, oh, I'm going to, sometimes people come up to me and say like, how do you select your mentors? And I found, what is the strategy for getting the right mentor? And, I have to say, I find it weird when people seem like they're strategically trying to become a mentee to me, like I think the way it really kind of organically works is you do a good job for somebody, they become really good people. When you work for them, they become invested in your success, and people recognize that your success helps their success over the long term. So, I didn't have any particular strategy, but I worked really hard, and I think I did a good job for people. And then, both John and Hillary really became, invested in my success. And when John was thinking about leaving CAP, he talked to me about whether I'd be interested in taking over the responsibilities. It was a big jump for me. I'd never run an organization this large, and I'd been I think he thought that I could, I had a good strategic sense of things and could lead in that way. But whether I could manage something so large, that was a big jump. And truthfully, having those mentors also are good role models. So when you take on a new experience, when I first became president of CAP, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but I would often think, like, what would Hillary do in this situation? Like,
I love that.
I would, I'm not going to get like a WWHD bracelet, but
Are you sure?
But
I kind of think that's awesome, actually.
But I kind of thought about how she ran meetings and how she would deal with people and how to manage and how to bring the best out of people and, how to incentivize people by, talking them up and making them really feel confident about their work. So, but also, you have to kind of bring out the best in people and hold people accountable as well. So I had those examples that I could also call on when I was in my path. But the truth of it is, like, I've advanced in my career because someone who was making that decision really felt invested in me, and felt confident in me because I'd proven that. So I think it is really much more. I mean, I'm sure there's someone who succeeded really well by like navigating, like networking with the exact right person and pushing them to do something. And, but I haven't actually come across those people. Usually you get a good reputation from the work you do, and then people kind of organically, it kind of moves more organically.
That's really interesting. I love that because it reminds me that there's this balance between, or sort of we as women in particular need to focus not only on doing great work, which I find women are very good at. Like, we know how to do that. That's why we get A's in school. That's why we've been outperforming men in academia for years. Yeah. But balanced with that, keeping in touch with people. Not just getting people who are invested in us, but actually nurturing those relationships in an organic way. Yeah. And then asking for what you need when you need it, and being pretty. Oh, yeah. I think that's Washington was a great
it is funny.
Yeah, because I came up in politics, right? So I started off as a state director during the Organizing for America push for health reform, and ran a lot of digital strategy for Senate campaigns. Campaign life is great training when it comes to learning how to make a solid ask. You get pretty used to getting yeses and nos and moving on either way in campaign life. And what I found is that those are the skills, like being assertive about what you need and asking for the help that you need, and seeing that not as a weakness, but as a strategy for moving forward. Has been like revolutionary.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. This is definitely a thing. I mean, so, I think one thing people definitely need to get, sort of one of the things that was most interesting to me when I started this job is, we used to have a system here, which I've actually gotten rid of, but we used to have a system here at CAP where you did a self-evaluation and like you rate yourself. It was part of the evaluation process for promotions, et cetera.
Let me guess how this goes over. I can know exactly the
I can tell you. So it was funny. Like you get, it goes 1 to 5, and it used to be it goes 1 to 5, and like 5 was amazing, and 0 and 1 was terrible. And I literally went through this process. So so you self-evaluate, and then your boss evaluates, and the kind of game theory of this as it worked out was the higher you rank yourself, it's like a conflictual conversation every time the boss gives you something lower. So, but the fascinating thing about it was for me is like, CAP is a place which, has a lot of women leaders, and executive leadership of the organization is myself and 2 women. Our executive team is like mostly women. And yet, so I oversee a lot of women, but I do oversee some men. And, and I was like, it was like amazing. Like I would get, not from every man, but from a lot of men, I would get like excellent in everything. And from women, they would be very self-evaluate. They would self-evaluate, which was to, be like, kind of hard on themselves. Like, I remember I did this. Like, I'm, just average on this. I'm good at this, but honestly, I could do a lot more to improve on this. And, I kind of got rid of that system because I was like, this is like a great way to inflate promotions for men. I mean, it didn't do that for me, but I was worried about other people at CAP.
Sure.
But also, I was like, we don't really want to reward behavior where people are like, I'm fantastic at everything.
Right.
But it is a thing. Like if that happens at a place like CAP, it is a challenge. And even in my own career, it's harder for women to be hyper aggressive about, their successes. I remember, I'll just tell this one story. I was working for Hillary when she was in the Senate. I was her legislative director. And, we had this idea. I had this idea for a speech for her to do. And we did the speech. It was something on some twist on April Fool's Day. And it went over really well. Everyone thought it was hysterical. And back in the day before social media, it was went online and people emailed it around. It was oh, we got all these comments and it was great. So what actually happened though is it went well, but I didn't know that she thought it went well. So we walked, we're going down the hall and, she said, then she said, it was great. It was great. Who did it? And I said, it was great team effort. And she said, yeah, okay, but whose idea was it? And I said, it was great. Everyone kind of worked on it together. And, it was great demonstration of how the team works well together. And she's like, yeah, but who came up with the idea? And I was like, well, again, and she stopped me and was like,
oh my God.
Do you think a man would did you come up with the idea? And I said, yeah, I came up with the idea, but it was a team effort. And she's like, do you think a man would really be on the third ask who was someone else's idea was a team effort?
Oh, wow.
You really have to say you did it. It was great. And it's great. You did it. You did it and it was great. But I shouldn't have, it's not like pulling teeth.
Right.
And it was a great listen to me, and I'm look, there are definitely times where, I think men can really overdo it. And I'm definitely, now that I'm a boss, I'm definitely okay, but you didn't actually do all that. Come on, guys. Right. But I do think we have to get a balance where women feel much more confident in talking about their successes.
Yeah, not, owning our achievements. Because we're very good at owning our failures at times. We should be able to own our achievements with the same audacity.
Yes, for sure. Now, I also think, though, and this is another way we have to get cultural change, too. Yeah. I don't want to be Pollyannish about this either. I think sometimes when women talk about their achievements, men react like they're hyper-aggressive. When if a man said the same thing, no one would think anything. So there's I don't think that women just make these decisions to be passive. I think that there's a lot in the culture that that penalizes women to take the same actions that men do, and that's something we need to change as well.
And it's so this unconscious bias that we're dealing with now.
Sure.
I wrote a piece actually when I first started Bossed Up for the Huffington Post called it was about hot mess chic. And it sort of described how being underselling yourself is very cool. And what I recently heard that reminded me of that was a wonderful young woman who had this really interesting talent to share, who literally in front of a bunch of guys said no, I'm not going to show you, because it was a dance that she knew or something that was this soccer thing. I don't exactly remember which one. She was I'm not going to do it. I don't want to be it'll be so unattractive. And she said that, and I was you just gave voice to that exact thing, which is I'm not going to show you my smarts. I'm not going to put my achievements on display because I don't want to come off as unattractive or threatening to your awesome manhood. And I have the in my story for the HuffPo, I sort of recount the dating experience that sort of turned that around for me when I found a man who was not only not threatened by my achievements, but thought it was really cool. Yeah. And that's things are changing slowly, but we have to talk about them.
Yeah. No. I highly recommend dating men with feminist mothers. That worked out for me. My husband's mother was a super, she was a ERA activist. And so he just had a completely different conception of the world. And
that's so cool.
And so, but I do think, and if you look at attitudes of millennial men, they're changing. And the culture is definitely changing. I mean, just in politics today, there's things that Hillary refers to as gendered, which no one, when we tried to do that, when we even referenced those things, there was a lot of penalty in 2008 as her trying to be victimized, etc. Whereas, so I think the culture is really changing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So last question for you, Neera,
Mm-hmm.
unless other ladies want to chime in now, go for it. This is your last shot. I have a question for you. That's okay. What has been the most challenging part and what has been the most rewarding part of stepping up in this leadership role that you're now in? So you said this was a big leap. You've got a big organization you're managing. Yeah. What's been challenging and what's been so rewarding?
My definitely biggest challenge all the time, and, just to be totally honest, my biggest challenge all the time is, balancing work and family is tough.
Yeah.
Definitely a tough issue. I am very privileged to have a relatively assertive 13-year-old daughter. I don't know where she get that from. But so she's very honest. Like if you're traveling, she'll be like, "Mom, you're traveling too much and I need to be here."
Nice.
Last year, she's like, "You have 2 jobs." And I was like, "Yes, I know. I have 2 jobs." But she's very good that she's verbalizing that.
That is cool.
But, that's something I always something I kind of navigate week to week. What's the right balance is. Am I traveling too much? Are there things that I'm giving, are there things are there responsibilities? Like I should be going to this event because it's really important for my job, but I've been gone 3 nights this week and my family can only take so much. So, that's a hard navigation all the time. And one of the things when I was younger, kind of coming up, I definitely had experiences. I have fewer of them now, although I still happen occasionally, but I definitely had experiences where, people just didn't look at me like a leader. And, right. I had this one experience on Hillary's campaign in 2008 when, I was running a meeting. We're bringing in all these donors. I was Hillary's policy director. And so there was donors, but academics and business leaders. And,
right.
It was my meeting and I was communicating what we're doing. And I had my deputy was there and a bunch of people in the room would look at him for approval of what I was saying. And it was so infuriating. And then I was like, and I was like, well, maybe it's because he's a man. But it was also okay, the guy looked 12 years old. Okay.
Right,
it was ridiculous.
Right.
I was like, it's not like he's older than me. And it's also, a lot of the things was sort of unconscious bias. I had no idea was
right.
because I was a woman or because I was short or because I was Indian or all 3, or was I not projecting well enough? But, so there's definitely some of that still exists in the world. Our traditional conception of a leader is not a woman. So we have to still tackle those things.
Right. Awesome. And how about your biggest success or biggest joy or best moments since stepping up?
Yeah. I've had so many great moments in this game. Right. I think the biggest thing for me, it was definitely a stretch to do this job when I started. I was felt like I was going on every, I was going it was I had to kind of stretch every muscle in my body to make sure I was doing things right. And it was a lot was on my shoulder. I didn't think, there were people who in the selection process, the board was pretty supportive, but there were people who had some doubts about what I could do. And really one of the things that was most rewarding to me is at the end of my first year, one of the people who had the most doubts of my leadership, came to me and was like, you're hitting it out of the park. And I could, I was wrong. I could be questioning it. And so that was great.
That is awesome.
There's a lot of amazing things that I'm kind of thrilled about every day. So it's hard to choose one thing.
I hear you. Cool. Well, we have one more question here from our audience, if we can indulge your time a bit longer, and then we'll wrap things up. Myra here from Brooklyn has a question, and I want to start by saying, Myra, check out Tuesday's recording on our blog from Jessica Lyons, who did a training on personal story, because this one might also help. And we also have a couple more coming up that relate to this. But she asks, do you have any advice for people in the middle of their career and not sure about their next move? For folks not happy with their current job, but unsure of the next position they want to take.
Yes, so I think it's really great. So you're not unhappy in your current position, right?
Not unhappy? No, she's not happy with their current
position. She's not happy.
Right.
So, one thing that was really important to me when I was when I was not happy, I've been in those jobs.
Yeah.
Where I've been in a job where I'm definitely not happy about it. I think the important thing is to talk to a bunch of people.
Right.
And talk to your friends, your friends of friends, to just talk about what they're really interested in, what they're doing. I mean, when I was in a kind of stuck job, I reached out to a bunch of my friends, and one of them was like, I have this great opening, you should do it.
Right.
And I ended up taking a job there, which led to something else. So it is really, I think sometimes people get anxious about everyone has to be happy in everything they do. And, it's totally fine to share with your friends that like you want to think about something else. And also you'll get ideas about things that you never thought of would be interesting to you. And sometimes they just percolate with you about, that is like something I hadn't thought about. So it's really critical to just reach out to people, talk to people in a variety of settings, in areas you might not think about. If you're in one area, think about talking to someone who's in a completely different line of work, to just get a perspective. And sometimes something just inside of you clicks that sounds really exciting. So
when I was an organizer, it's funny, we were trained on the power of a one-on-one meeting, right? There was a tactic to one-on-one meetings. And I found now in this role in helping people transition careers, that has never been more true and more powerful. Sitting down with people, growing your squad, growing your community, like reaching out and daring to have coffee or have a phone call with people as an exploratory conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
About like common interests and intersections has been so huge.
And good people are often looking for talent and whatever they're doing too.
Right.
So,
and Myra, I found that as you do this, speaking to Neera's point about how we sometimes pretend like we're happy too much, and like there's some weird taboo about exclaiming your disinterest or dissatisfaction. There's also a big taboo about talking ever about envy or jealousy.
Yeah.
And what I found is envy is supremely helpful in tapping into your direction. Like if you are envious of certain other people's careers, like lean into that discomfort, to borrow a term from Brene Brown, right? Like really like think about where that envy is coming from, because that can point you to what you want in your life that she has or he has in their lives. And so it's just like a helpful negative emotion that can be used as a red flag instead of letting it really use you.
Great advice.
Thanks, Neera. Well, I want to thank you again for sharing some of your lunch hour with us. This has been so fun.
No, it's such a great thing that you're doing. So I'm glad.
Thank you. I'm sure our paths will have to cross again real soon.
I hope so.
Everyone can keep up with Neera Tanden on Twitter at Neera Tanden and at Thoughts.org. So we'll be continuing to tweet out at you. And thank you again. I hope to see you again real soon, Neera.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Talk
to you soon.
Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye.